Hello again, everyone. We have a special Wednesday edition of going live on all my platforms. I got to get a name for this, Alex. I got to think of what I want to call these segments that I'm doing these days. But without further ado, we're talking about the benefits of play at work. And I have Alex from Barometer XP, an expert on this because this is what she does all day, every day. But Alex, I'm going to go ahead and give you space to introduce yourself to the people and tell them why play at work is important for you.
Oh, so many reasons. I am really passionate about people feeling like work is a place where they add value, where they're connected, where they're part of something bigger than themselves, and where it's a net positive. I know a lot of people, most people have to work. You have to get a paycheck. You got to buy food and pay your rent or mortgage, all those things. But for a lot of people, work is a pretty miserable experience, and a lot of that is there's because of the relationships with colleagues. And to me, that's sort of the lowest hanging fruit to not necessarily be best friends with everybody that you work with. That's not realistic. But to have the types of positive relationships where at least you feel like you're on the same side, you have each other's back, you're in it together. And it's not that hard to cultivate that. And play is a really great tool for sparking that initial connection, for exploring how different people think and how we feel and act in different situations, and what strengths we have, what blind spots we have, and how to use all that information for better working relationships. So that's what I do, and that's what I'm really passionate about.
Thank you for sharing that. And I feel like we need to play a little bit more, especially right now with everything that's going on in our environments today. So, why do you feel like as adults we kind of lose that not even desire because we want to play, but we
hmm
lose the ability to be free enough and allow ourselves to play more?
There's a couple reasons. One, I think, has a lot to do with technology. So much of our life is sort of interacting with our phones or our tablets and online applications, and everything is very structured. Like these apps are really well designed for us, to capture our attention and take us through the steps that they want. Whether it's we're buying something, we're playing a game like a solitary game, we're learning about something, and we just fill all of our spare time that we maybe used to turn to play, or we used to do something active, more creative. We now fill it with just interacting with these very structured tools and apps, and have that instant gratification. We very much want to know exactly what's going to happen before we do something and then have it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Play, there's a lot of vulnerability inherent in it. You don't know if you're going to have fun. You don't know if you're going to do well. If you're doing something with other people, you don't really know what mood they're going to be in, what mood you're going to be in. And it seems a little more risky to be vulnerable. And I think we've gotten so used to instant gratification and getting exactly what we want and having all of our experiences be specifically tailored to us that it's kind of scary to be vulnerable.
I agree. I talk a lot about vulnerability being strength and being able to tap in to say, like, it's okay to not go for perfectionism or just allow things to just happen and unfold, that we don't always have to go towards an outcome. And your organization works with a lot of different varied companies and leader on doing just that, just letting things be, and creating these games and environments and spaces where people can collaborate and have fun but work towards a greater goal. So tell us a little bit more about what that looks like and how you all come up with the context of all the games and gamification.
Yeah, so we have a mix of there's some games that we've created, but a lot are just tabletop games that you could buy at any store, party games that people maybe have played with their friends. We have a way of breaking down games to their mechanics and dynamics. So the game mechanics are, what are the actions that you have to take? Is there a betting element? Is there a negotiation element? Is there a drawing or creative thinking element? What do you actually do? And the dynamics are, how do you interact with each other, or what interpersonal skills or even critical thinking type skills are inherent in the game. And so what we try to do is say, what does a team need? Whether it's a fun team bonding type experience to get to know each other, to build some of that trust and psychological safety, or is this a team that needs to practice making decisions together, and or maybe structuring conversations so that they can get to decisions more quickly, or they need to start thinking about How do you better understand roles and responsibilities if there's a lack of clarity? So we tap into this library that we have of games and say, what's going to start the right conversation? What's going to spark the right types of insights or learnings? Or what's going to help practice the type of change that this particular team needs? And it's really meeting different teams, different groups where they are with a very carefully, intentionally designed game session. That's usually part of a broader training or retreat or workshop or something.
Yeah, and I know that you all have literally hundreds of different games that to choose from. So it's really like it's only limited by the creativity that comes up. It seems like when it comes to this.
Yeah, and it's not even, I think in our catalog now we have about 120 games, but every single game there's infinite ways you can spin it. And that's what's most fun to me is once I can tell when I really feel like I have a full understanding of a game when I'm like, oh, if I explain the directions a little bit differently here, it's going to result in a different experience and maybe we'll make it harder or easier or funnier or more serious for the people playing. Or if I add this type of component or assign people to different roles or prompt them with
Mhm.
different questions going into the experience, it's totally going to change what comes out of it. And it's fun to, as a facilitator, as a trainer consultant, it's really fun to have that much creativity at my disposal.
Absolutely. Are you finding like, especially in the climate we're in now, are there certain industries that are adapting games and play more than others, or is it really kind of even across the board?
Um, I wouldn't say there's a specific industries that are doing it more. There's certainly some industries we haven't been able to break into, and those are industries that are very defined by the billable hour. So law and finance, to some extent manufacturing, where everything is you need like a quantifiable, unit of productivity. We've had a lot of work with nonprofit organizations, associations, and then companies where the leadership really values culture and understands that culture isn't just do you like the people that you work with, but culture is what can the organization do, what can leadership do, leaders at every level do to make a more positive, conducive, less stressful, less friction work environment. And that could include, yeah, that's definitely building relationships with colleagues, but that's also, can people access the tools and resources they need when they need it, or is it a big, is that a big hurdle that sucks up people's time and causes frustrations? Do people understand how their particular work fits in with a broader picture? Do they just feel like they're doing something tedious that doesn't really matter? There's all of these little things that leaders, really anybody, can do to improve their workplace culture. You have to see it, you have to be able to think that way, and that's something that games and play is a really great tool for, is what are some of those invisible forces that have a direct impact on both the experience and the outcomes, but that maybe you don't see.
Yeah, I found it interesting that the industries you said were kind of not resistant to it, but not really adapting the games and play. Because when I think about it, billable hours is a lot. It's a level of individualism that's there that that person needs to be able to perform at a high level. I would think that they'd want to take them and make sure they're operating as the best version of themselves. So give them a little fun. But that sounds like it's not
Well,
happening.
there's then the
So.
overhead cost, like that's greater overhead costs for the company because no one can bill for
Mhm.
those hours. There tends to not be a lot of staff development uh, action happening in a lot of those industries.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are you finding so? What are some of the like based on your research and what you're seeing across client bases? What are some of the wins that you've seen from like the play? As far as like it doesn't have to be like set metrics, but what are you seeing that the greatest advantages are?
Oh yeah. Well, what happens in just about every session that we do where there's the manager is there with the team is, even before we even get into playing the game, just in how you explain the instructions, you realize that not everybody processes information in the same way. And different types of
Mhm.
detail or different levels of detail are important to different people. And so often, even before we get into the game, the leader will say, wow, I just realized that when I'm explaining a new project or when I'm giving performance expectations, I'm saying it in a way that makes sense to me, but that may not be what makes sense or what's most helpful to other people. And I need to pay more attention to how people process information, how they receive instructions, what motivates them, and make sure that I'm delivering that really important information in a way that they're going to be receptive. So you'll have leaders say, wow, I don't leave enough time for people to ask me questions. And that sounds so simple, but if you haven't thought about it and haven't thought about how do you actually make the time and space for that and make sure that people know you're not just saying it, you really do welcome questions and welcome ideas, people probably aren't
Hmm.
going to do it. They might think that they're going to be, be penalized in some way or that their ideas won't be welcomed. So that's something that happens all the time. Another big type of insight that comes up is, the relationship between introverts and extroverts on a team. And there are some, when we know that that's a dynamic on that team, we'll do some games that have more nonverbal communication elements. And you have the introverts who feel really seen because they feel like they know how to insert themselves in and be involved. And the extroverts can see that by just jumping in and talking right away and not leaving time for people to process or not actively inviting in other voices, they're really missing out on all of the wisdom and the experience and the strengths of other people on their team. So that sparks a really important conversation about how do we structure our meetings so we're getting everybody's voice and everybody feels included.
No, I love that, and how it's like, oh, it's the contrast between the different personality types, behavioral patterns, and everything, and you really get that it gets pronounced through the games and the
Yeah,
play.
but what often
So.
happens in that exact example is, the introverts will say, "Wow, the extroverts on the team, they don't care about our opinion. They don't value our
Mm.
expertise. They're just trying to take over." The extroverts are like, "How come they don't want to be part of their conversation? Are they trying to pass all the work along to us?" So people jump to these assumptions that are wildly inaccurate just because that's the lens that they're looking at it through. And so using play as a way to look at different behaviors and look at how people show up and what people take away from a situation is such a helpful way to check yourself and say, what assumptions am I making, or how am I showing information, or what am I doing that's maybe having an unintended negative consequence for other people.
And are you asking, like, after the game? Are there points where you stop during the workshop and like, hey, what did you gain from that? Is that how that works for you all?
Yeah, and that's probably where the bulk of the time is spent, especially when the objective of the session is really some type of learning or development. If we're just doing something that's for fun, we won't do as much reflection. But if we're getting deeper, then that asking those questions and asking the right questions is a really, really important piece.
100%. Right, to make sure that the question is open and thought provoking, and allows that space to get them to think a little differently and
Yeah.
introspect. So with we mentioned technology earlier and how it can kind of be a blocker because it's the structure and people just get caught up in their own world. How are you seeing in the world of play? How are you being seeing technology being adopted to kind of enhance and augment the experience?
Yeah, it's fascinating to see game companies, especially if their game is a a tabletop game or a card game, but they do an online adaptation of it. It's really fascinating to see how they're moving beyond the sort of literal do exactly what you do in person online, and how they're
Mm.
building in, you don't have to read through the instructions as clearly because there's certain functions that the game can automate. So you're focusing more as you're playing just on the fun part and not like keeping score or keeping track of whose turn it is, or what moves were made before. All of that can be documented. So it from a facilitation perspective, you can actually use the game very, very differently if you're doing the in-person versus the digital version of it, because it's going to highlight very different ways that people interact, very different team dynamics, and spark different conversations. So that's exciting to me, is seeing how, very similar to when with COVID, when so much work went virtual, and at first it was, well, let's just do things the exact same way that we were doing them in person, but virtually. But that doesn't really work. It's just such a different way of
Right.
communicating, very different channels available. So seeing game designers and game companies that are thinking, well, how do we utilize this new format to enhance the experience, not just recreate it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would think because you also have, speaking of communication styles, you have the chats and stuff where people can still get their point across. So they're feeling like they're being heard during the game. Whereas instead of having in person, everyone's just talking over one another as they go in certain
Yeah.
instances as
Yeah.
well.
Well,
Is
and
that
that ends
another
up becoming
kind
a
of
really useful conversation when team plays virtually, because some people love the side conversations in the chat. Some people find it really stressful and really distracting and feel like they're missing out
mm,
because they can't pay attention in two ways. Whereas some people
right,
find that written communication is just easier for them. And that's a really important dynamic to highlight on a team and say, what are the norms? How are we going to make sure that everybody's getting all the information that they need? Some people, while you're on a Zoom and you have the chat, they're also texting each other. And so like there's all so many different communication channels, and not all of them work for everybody. And it's a really important conversation for a team to have, is like, what are our expectations and for the channels that we're all using, that we're all actually expected to stay up to date on, versus what are ones that are sort of for, less formal, less critical information. And it's okay if you miss something.
right. Yeah, and I think that's a critical conversation for teams to have as well. Because if we think about it, the teams are using like all these different modalities of communication, and some of them they will say, this is for when it's not urgent, but they're still using it for urgent. And then when you don't respond, your leadership is up in arms about the fact that you didn't respond. But you just told me that I don't have to check this all the time because it's distracting
Mm-hmm.
me, etc. So it's kind of like seeing also where your messaging is convoluted and where you need to simplify and really take everyone into account,
Yeah.
which is I think that's
Yeah,
powerful.
I think we all could probably use a good reminder every day to just like be a little bit more self-aware. Are we, practicing what we preach? Are we modeling the type of
Right.
behavior that we want? And none of us are perfect. We're all messy and irrational at times. But to just say, in the workplace, if you're a leader and you want people to perform a certain way, you have to make sure that you're modeling that. You have to make sure that you're not only setting the expectations, but that you're being consistent with them, and that you're holding people to a consistent standard, or your words are kind of meaningless.
Absolutely. I'm assuming that this is a question that a lot of people are like, oh, I'm interested in adopting play at work, but I don't know if what we're going through in my organization fits. Are there any situations or circumstances where you would say play does not add benefits to?
I think there's situations where I wouldn't go to play first. If you have a team that's really in crisis and really in conflict, asking them to play, as we talked about at the beginning, there's a lot of vulnerability. They're not willing to be vulnerable with each other. So you can't dive right into that. You have to do something uh, to have them take some steps back from the conflict and just be willing to see each other as humans. Before we get into, you're the marketing person and you're the salesperson and you're the coach or whatever. We have to just say, we're all humans. We're all working in the same place. We all want to succeed. Let's just be willing to acknowledge each other's humanity in that sense, and kind of get to know each other in a different way. So you might do something playful, but that's not necessarily a game, like, something that's going to bring out stories or have people share, a hobby they have or an interest, or maybe something from their past. And then eventually you can get them to where they feel comfortable enough playing and exploring some of the conflict dynamics within the game. But I really do think that any interpersonal issues or interpersonal goals can be benefited through play.
Yeah, and I love how you stated that it doesn't need to be the first thing because they're not going to be open and receptive. But I feel that that is where a lot of organizations struggle because they immediately go, they have an issue, they go to training.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the team, the training is not going to be well received because you have the mindset and the cultural aspect levels that have not been addressed first for them to be open to that. So I love that you highlighted that,
Yeah,
Alex.
you are so spot on. And we advocate. We have a whole bunch of different tools to help people figure out how do you fit play into to different workplace situations. And one of the frameworks we have, if you picture an iceberg, and there's three different levels of depth. There's the part that's above the water. There's the part that's just below, and then there's the stuff that's like way, way, way down deep. So the above the surface, we call that team bonding, and that's purely playing to get to know each other as people, to build social capital, to have some moments of joy and levity at work. It's crazy to me that people are expected to be serious all the time. That's not healthy. That's not how you get the best performance out of people. So if you just want to have 5 minutes, 10 minutes of doing something fun and silly at work, great. Here's some activities that you can do that will get people thinking creatively, get them to learn about each other. Build that initial we're all in this together. Then if you're doing a training or if you're doing a retreat and you want to focus on building trust or you want to focus on leveraging different strengths, we call that team building. That's the next level down in the iceberg. And that's where you're playing the game, but you're adding that reflective question of like, how are you showing up? What is this like for you? What do you feel like is going well? What do you feel like is making it stressful? What questions do you have about how other people are showing up? And just trying to tease out those individual perspectives, individual differences, commonalities, so that by better understanding each other as humans, we then can apply that into our work. And I know, you're the person to go to when there's a deadline and I'm really stressed because you're going to calm me down. You're going to help me refocus. And like, what an amazing asset for me to have at work, knowing that about you. And then the deepest level, team development, that's where it's part of some organizational change, a process improvement, a strategy realignment, where you're using the play, the games, as a tool to help practice the change, to help adapt, to help get different ideas and different feedback. So a lot of it is just what play aside, what's the objective that you want to see for the group? And then how do you fit play in as a tool? Where does it fit?
Awesome. I know. I'll tell you what doesn't play is time because it is flying right now on us. So I want to be respectful of your time and the listeners. So thank you for sharing so much knowledge and giving us a basis and a foundation to understand how play benefits us as at work and when it may be best, depending on what you're looking for. I think that that is something that was critical for a lot of our listeners to understand. Like, how can this be introduced to our organization if we're not doing it already? So tell people a little bit about how to connect with you, Alex, and how to work with your organization.
Yeah, so the organization is called Barometer XP, and we have a lot of resources on our website. We do direct facilitation services, we do workshops and trainings. We also train other people on how to lead play and how to incorporate play into their workplace. And the thing I'm most excited about right now, we just launched it this spring, is it's called the Play Concierge platform, and it's actually a free tool that people can go to and search for games that have that starts different types of conversations or explore different elements of culture. As if you go to our website on the top menu, there's something called the Play Concierge. And if you click that, you can set up the free account. And that's basically all of our
Nice.
stuff, all of our tools and wisdom and game database that people can have at their fingertips.
Walk, don't run to that website and get all of that goodness through that concierge, people. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alex, for sharing your time, your wisdom, and being playful because we need it. We need people to not take themselves so seriously and be open and curious to the experience. So I appreciate you, appreciate the work you and your organization is doing. And everyone who's listening, we appreciate you for tuning in. We had over 1,300 people watching us live here today. So thank you to each one of you. And to those watching the replay, don't forget you can still type your questions to us and we'll get to you and answer and respond because you matter and we value your opinion. Until next time, everyone, remember to keep ascending. We'll see you soon.